The Winter's Tale is a very late play by Shakespeare. He wrote it probably in his late 40s, around about 1611, and died in 1616. So it comes very late in the canon, and he's experimenting to some extent with form. It isn't a comedy, and it isn't a tragedy. It balances both those things. He got the story from Robert Greene's Elizabethan pastoral novella, Pandosto or the Triumph of Time, and he adds certain elements to that.
Stay your thanks a while and pay them when you part!
It's a challenging play and presents many challenges to any team of actors and directors and designers who tackle it, because there are certain elements that you have to pull together in some way. And if you try and find some kind of specific location, both either in time or place for this play, you kind of run mad, because there's always one element that doesn't fit into the jigsaw.
One of the earliest starting points was deciding on what the world was, and in conversations with Greg about the fact that it was a very domestic world, albeit a royal court, but how do we actually set that world on stage? An enclosed, slightly claustrophobic, slightly sterile world, and it was how do we create that space on stage without being literal.
It's a world, a remote world, if you like. It's perhaps, it's not only elsewhere, but it's elsewhen. That's perhaps how we took it.
We began to look at lots of photography and paintings of the sort of vaguely Romanov period, just to decide where these people lived. We found a photograph of a room with no ceiling, with a sky above it, and that was one of those things that we both sort of looked at and said, that's the image for the play, and it sort of began from there.
Press me not, beseech you so. There is no tongue that moves, none in the world, so soon as yours could win me.
We decided that although Leontis and Polixenes were extremely good friends, had been and sort of still are until the rupture happens, that there would have been a competitive thing, and that Polixenes would always have been the kind of one who's good at games and was getting the girls and is more handsome and sexy.
Hermione starts off the play. She has a wonderful husband, a gorgeous 6-year-old son, and a baby who's 2 weeks away. And I think it's that sense of joy and ripeness. Doesn't mean to say that Hermione is not this kind of nun-like character, that she is a woman. And therefore is that because she is in this particular condition, that her relationship with Polixenes, even though is absolutely innocent, in some respects could be considered rather ambiguous, that there is this rather tactile relationship between these two because they've known each other for a long time.
Yet of your royal presence, I'll adventure the borrow of a week.
Hermione, my dearest, thou never spokest to better purpose.
Never.
What attracted me to the part of Hermione was the particular journey that she goes on. She starts off very simply as a devoted wife, an adoring mother, with her husband's best friend, Polixenes. They have a wonderful relationship, they're all friends. Everything seems to be fine. She is an innocent, and it's the way that she endures, the ability to endure, is what the strongest sense of her character trait.
We have to assume it's a good marriage, a happy marriage, yet planted, and Shakespeare does this so well, he plants this little seed that there was this little problem right at the beginning when he first proposed. She didn't. She took a while. And so planted in his mind somewhere is, I wonder why? Why didn't she just want to marry me? What was wrong with me? Why? You know, was it somebody else, something else? And this little thing's been festering in his head, perhaps, throughout their marriage. Leontes' jealousy in the play, which sort of kicks off the play and takes us right through the first three acts, is one of the hardest things to solve. It's one of the first problems of what's called a problem play. And because he becomes convinced that his wife, Hermione, is having an affair with his best friend, Polixenes. She isn't, but he's absolutely convinced and proceeds to wreck her life, everyone's life, his own life. Why? Where does this come from?
Too hot! Too hot! To mingle friendship far is mingling bloods. I have tremor on me. My heart dances, but not for joy. Not joy.
My route is often through research, and so I went to talk to a whole range of experts in mental disorder to try and find out whether this was a real medical condition or just is the character simply a psychopath. What's going on here? And I spoke to psychiatrists, psychotherapists, all sorts of people. And eventually it was Maria Ron from the famous Maudsley Hospital who I talked to, Professor Ron. And she was fantastic because she absolutely defined it as a medical condition called morbid jealousy. A condition that's well known that afflicts particularly men, particularly in their 40s, in exactly detail for detail what Shakespeare's written. This completely unreasonable, paranoid idea that the partner is betraying them, leading to complete unreasonableness, violence.
Hermione, how thou lovest us, show in our brother's welcome.
I think that once I discovered this condition, morbid jealousy, the good thing, the helpful thing, was to look at the character as a sick man, an ill man, rather than, as I say, just a sort of psychopath. And that becomes a very, because it's quite difficult to be sympathetic towards Leontes, both for the actor playing him and indeed for the audience, because he's so unreasonable. He taxes one's patience as an audience. And the moment you can start looking at him, and I found ways of involving the audience in this, start looking at him as an ill man, as a man who is as helpless in the situation as the people who he's destroying. I think it's quite a useful way of approaching the character.
In thick, knee-deep, head and ears of forked one.
I think it's one of the most exciting plays to work on because of the tremendous variety of language and of how Shakespeare uses the rhythms and everything to create this violence, this density of feeling that is in that text. And it is wonderful it is written in iambic pentameter, so the meter is quite, is the structure of the language all the time. But then you get amazing things like inch thick, knee deep, or head and ears of forked one, and it's knocking against, the rhythm is knocking against each other, and just in the very density of how the thoughts are moving, if an actor in fact just experiments by moving on every punctuation mark, he will feel, or she will feel, the blood is running so hot and so strong in that play because of the violence and because of the unbelievable sexuality in the play.
Very complicated. He, like a master jazz musician, he goes round the beat and Leontes is talking about one thing and then something else comes to his mind, and Shakespeare keeps all this, and it makes the language very dense, and some people talk about it as being rather impenetrable and complex, but all of that was fantastically useful for me, because his mind is dancing, it is going all over the place.
There have been, or I am much deceived, cuckolds ere now. And many a man there is, even at this present. Now, while I speak this, holds his wife by the arm, that little thinks she has been sluiced in his absence, and his pond fished by his next neighbour.
Cis Berry, the great voice guru, says, that people shouldn't read Shakespeare; they should perform it. It was written to be spoken out loud, not to be looked at on the page. And sometimes scholars can sort of wind themselves up into all sorts of knots in trying to figure out Leontes' speeches, for example, by just staring at them on the page.
What is extraordinary about Leontes is how he uses the language and its violence and its movement, but how you get the feeling that everything he says leads him to the next thought.
Satisfy the entreaties of your mistress. Satisfy. Let that suffice.
Leontes picks up on that word, satisfy, satisfy, and takes us into the whole subversion of the language. Satisfy can mean actually make it all right and give you enough, but it also has a sexual connotation. And he reaches for that. He grabs on the sexual connotations in the language, and therefore feeds, by doing that, feeds his own jealousy.
Is whispering nothing? Is leaning cheek to cheek? Is meeting noses? Kissing with inside lip?
He says, is whispering nothing, is leaning cheek to cheek, kissing with inside lip. I mean, nothing could be sexier than that word. And he gets wilder and wilder. If this be nothing, the world and all that in it's nothing. And it's the use of the language which is all the time feeding his own thoughts and his own feelings. And I find this extraordinary always with Shakespeare. What comes first, the thought or the language?
I know of no other play in literature which explores sexual obsession with so acute a power of observation. It's an astonishing, dangerous, difficult play of psychological depth and realism. It's also a play that blisters with pain and hurt.
Bear the boy hence, he shall not come about her. Away with him, and let her sport herself with that she's big with, for 'tis Polixenes has made thee swell thus.
I suppose the pregnancy, for me, was something very particular to play, and even more tragic when Leontes accuses her of adultery. It's so extraordinary, but she takes it on and thinks perhaps in 5-10 minutes' time he'll come out of this.
Go, do our bidding, hence.
Beseech your highness, call the queen again.
In creating the long gallery, which was the main element of the set, what I tended to do was looked at those long galleries which had panelled walls and lots of windows, and actually took away the windows but left a space where the windows were and created the panels. So in effect we created a series of wings, so that we had many entrances throughout the set.
The other thing that I thought was wonderful in Rob Jones's design was that the corridor, a sort of perspective corridor, strange perspective corridor, was sort of like Leontes' the inside of his head with strange entrances that people could just come at all the time, and it was a kind of absurdist, surrealist set, yet had all that realism of a modern context. And that combination, I don't know what it was like for the other characters, but it was fantastic for me because Leontes keeps trying to ground himself in the real world, and yet he's spiraling, so that combination of realism and a nightmare, if you like, was fantastically helpful for my character.
We began to find moments where we could actually take the whole set and move in the walls, so the whole thing became more and more claustrophobic, and it just sort of narrowed in to a point when the perspective looked huge and actually threw figures into relief. So the further, a figure like Leontes walked down stage, the bigger he felt, and the longer and deeper the set looked.
Yes, such ado, to make no stain, a stain as passes colouring.
I think that she's totally positive. I think her agenda throughout the play is proactive. It's about loving. I think her heart is enormous, that she has some great friends, and her agenda is to resolve something that has become fantastically ugly, and she doesn't always understand it, but she's so wonderfully strong. There's no way that I think if you were in a bad situation, the one person you would want on your side is Paulina.
What stands betwixt you and danger?
Paulina's a terrific character in the play because she's the only one who actually takes him on in the early part of the play, and as a real match for him. She's a tigress. It's fantastic.
From your good queen.
Good queen.
Good queen, my lord. Good queen. I say good queen.
Paulina has a line when she challenges the king, Leontes, and he says to her, good queen, ironically, because by then he doesn't believe she is a good queen. And Paulina says, with, it seems to me, 10 strong beats in the line, good queen, my lord, good queen, I say good queen. And she seems to stress all of it. And what Shakespeare's doing, it seems to me, is telling us how to play that, giving us a character note 400 years later, which is just so fabulous that he puts that in his verse.
The good queen, for she is good, hath brought you forth a daughter. Here it is.
Now, the scene that I found very challenging was the one with the baby. Paulina is so sure of her friend. This is what I think, that she so loves Leontes and Hermione that she completely believes when she takes this newborn baby, who must be about 12 or 24 hours old, to its father, that he will totally be reconciled to his life and understand, and you'll see the tiny little baby. And she has such confidence in this that she approaches Leontes and then, for the first time, really does see his madness.
Out, a mankind witch, hence the power. Out a door! A most intelligent and born! While she lives, my heart will be a burden to me.
Shakespeare indicates that Leontes has stopped sleeping, so in addition to all the turmoil in his mind, there would simply be the stress of not sleeping, and anyone who's just had a single night's bad sleep knows how that can affect you the next day. There's some evidence in the text that he stopped sleeping for about 3 weeks or so. And then you start noticing things that, like by the trial scene, which is the final scene of Act 3, before he disappears from the play for Act 4, that he hardly says anything. He's in charge of the trial. In previous scenes, he's been raging around, rushing around the stage, never stops speaking. Suddenly, he's rather silent and almost inarticulate.
This session's
What I want to do when the trial scene, when Hermione comes in, is to present her as a woman who has nothing, that she's taken off to this squalid prison cell, and she would be, if she was still the queen, she would be sitting in a bed with hundreds of people there, and she's now taken off to this prison cell, and the baby is born, and the baby's taken away, and as a woman, as a mother, what happens then? That your body is changing. Your body is the milk is, she's producing milk, and there's no one to give it to, and what I wanted to do was try and present it in that she was a tragic figure, that you'd turn around and you'd still see that without being graphic, the kind of birth fluid. That it was immediate, that it was something... Having said that, even though she's tragic, she's not a victim. Because she chooses not to be a victim.
Since what I am to say must be but that which contradicts my accusation.
Stark mad! For all thy bygone fooleries were but spices of it.
I think she is so angry, and this speech that what study torments tyrant has for me, I think the actress has to make a choice here, and through rehearsal process it was interesting to see which way I tried both ways, in fact. First of all, do you believe that Hermione really is dead? And if so, I think you come on with a heart broken, absolutely heartbroken, and you just want to kill this man. And then she gets a kind of control where she's absolutely satirical with Leontes and throws the arrows into his heart of what she really wants to say. And there's a control in the writing. And by the end, she does say, and vengeance for it, not dropped down yet. And I think that she means she's going to do something terrible.
Take your patience to you, and I'll say nothing.
Actually, what happens is she does break Leontes, and there's utter confusion for her. She's having to watch what was her friend, her erstwhile friend, breaking down, sobbing, and lifting his hands for help. And I think we then see the great contradiction in Paulina, and this huge heart, this enormous human heart. She's just filled with humanity. And so she's fighting against hating and loving and wanting to help. And she eventually does put her hands out and lifts him up and supports him as they walk out. But the contradictions are enormous in her, but her love for humanity overrides it.
When Leontes kind of realizes what he's done, or wakes up, if you like, out of this terrible mental state, he promises to visit Hermione's grave and talks about wetting the grave with tears of recreation. He talks about repentance being almost like his recreation. I put a different emphasis on the word and said recreation, because that is what, in a way, he's intending to do. I think by having investigated this medical condition, morbid jealousy, one of the things that Maria Ron had talked about was the terrible problems that people who have this illness experience afterwards, because it's quite difficult for them to come to terms with what they've done. They're now normal again, if you like. They're seeing the world sanely again. But they now have to face up to what they did when they were in the condition.
Thou didst speak but well when most the truth, which I receive much better than to be pitied of thee.
Besides, this place is famous for the creatures of prey that keep upon it.
Winter's Tale contains the most famous stage direction in Shakespeare, Exit Pursued by Bear. Now, academics have a field day trying to identify and decide why this bear is there. However, I found, in terms of trying to stage this moment that everybody's waiting for, to see how you do the bear, the problem was not Exit Pursued by Bear. The problem was Enter Bear. And in Rob Jones' design, how we managed to create that was that the bear somehow was there all the time, under this sort of snowy landscape, and it just reared up behind poor old Antigonus and enveloped him.
I think in using the silk, one of the really magical things about that was that because we had a large piece of silk in the rehearsal room, it allowed Greg and the actors to actually use it, and lots of things developed in the rehearsal room about how do we use that silk. I mean, it's that thing of setting up a toy box of parts for the set and then working it through over quite a long rehearsal period.
I never saw the heavens so dim by day. A savage clamour. Well, may I get aboard? This is the taste.
Sometimes, because we had a sort of bare head, almost a sort of puppet of it, it would look astonishingly like a marauding polar bear. And sometimes it would look like Exit Pursued by Avalanche.
In Bohemia, we had this huge working sort of world of everyone in dirty clothes and clogs and leather aprons, and all the guys are working in the sheep shearers. It wasn't literally a wool shed, but there was a sense of that. We had bales hanging on ropes. We had this huge truck at the back, which was basically like an old, not a threshing machine, but one of those old wool, like a giant spinning machine which had wheels moving. Another thing we did was that we had very strong palette. When I started to design it, we looked at how do we portray these two worlds. The court was a very cold, steely, formal world, so it was almost colourless, but it wasn't black and white, but it had a sense of being monochrome. So that when we left that world and went to Bohemia, we went for very natural colours, all sort of vegetable dyes, burgundies, terracottas, greens, heathery colours. So it was a very, very different world, as if all their colour reference was taken from the world of nature around them, as indeed it would have been, because, you know, all the dyes then were natural dyes. In a sense, when we went back from that world to the court, it was still a monochrome world, but it was slightly warmer than it had been. In fact, in the lighting, it began to warm up. So it was almost as if it had slightly thawed. We're in a frozen world. We went to this sort of springtime, summery world, and then the court again, which was thawed ever so slightly.
The fact that Leontes is off stage, out of the play for Act 4, which is an extremely long act, you know, it's about an hour or more sitting in the dressing room, was terribly useful in this particular case, because when he returns, he's a sort of transformed character, a different man, not just repentant, I think, but in a way almost destroyed by the realization of what he did, the guilt.
Luckily, of course, the oracle comes true and Perdita arrives, and at last Hermione can be revealed. But during that time, of course, there's a relationship growing with Leontes, and she has to keep Leontes on the straight and narrow and not allow him to marry, which all his court want him to do, the court that has now fallen apart. And nothing is being conducted in the state. He no longer wants to be the king or conduct this place as we saw originally in a kind of wonderfully ordered way. We see people behind us playing cards on stage. Nobody's caring. People are slovenly. And she's being begged to get him back on track and to marry. But she knows the one thing that can't happen is that he would take another bride because his wife is alive. And so she makes him swear on the Bible that he will never, never marry.
The last scene presents one of the greatest challenges, in a way, because you're asking the audience to believe that this woman has been hidden herself away for 16 years, and that the reconciliation between Leontes and Hermione, affected by poor Lina, will be done in this astonishing way, that she's going to pretend that she's a statue. And then when called upon to move, she will come down and take Leontes by the hand. But I think it's a challenge, it's one of the greatest challenges of the play. What's crucial is to make the actors utterly believe it, because if they believe it, the audience will believe it. And in a way, it doesn't matter if it's heightened, if it's absurd in a way, because what Shakespeare manages to reveal is a sort of greater truth.
I was talking to a student who was writing a thesis about The Winter's Tale and asked me my opinions about the final scene, and said, I think the reason why Hermione doesn't say anything to Leontes is because there is nothing to say, and she doesn't forgive him, and no. It's if you think that, therefore I think you're missing the point of Hermione, the reason why she's there, and it's very simple. It's not complicated, and yet you have to. I mean, would I forgive someone doing that? I don't think I could, but Hermione does.
It kind of condenses this massive 16-year epic story, and by condensing it then magnifies and illuminates something that is a profound desire in everyone, the desire for there to be a second chance, for there to be forgiveness, for there to be some kind of redemption. And Shakespeare's not necessarily saying that redemption always happens. He's saying that he recognizes that we hope it can happen. That's perhaps why the play is life-affirming. That, I think, is its grace.